Meditations on the Tarot, Letter 13, Death. And the woman said to the serpent, We may eat of the fruit of the trees of the garden, but God said, You shall not eat of the fruit of the tree which is in the midst of the garden, neither shall you touch it, lest you die. But the serpent said to the woman, You will not die, for God knows that when you eat of it, your eyes will be opened, and you will be as gods, knowing good and evil. Genesis 3, 2-5. O dry bones, hear the word of the Lord. Ezekiel 27, 4. Dear unknown friend, have you ever been struck by the contrary statements concerning death made by God and the serpent in the narrative in Genesis on the fall? Because God says there, You shall not eat of the tree of knowledge of good and evil, for on the day when you eat from it you will die. And the serpent says, You will not die. Here God is categorical. The serpent is just as much so. Did the serpent quite simply lie? Or is it a matter of a fundamental error on the part of the serpent? Or again, did he state a truth from the range of truths proper to the domain of the serpent, which are untruths in the domain of truths for God? In other words, there are two immortalities and two different deaths, one from the point of view of God, the other from the point of view of the serpent. Thus, is it simply that the serpent understands by death what God understands by life, and that he understands by life what God understands by death? Now, I invite you, dear unknown friend, to set to work with a view to finding an answer to this question, whilst bringing to your attention fruits of the work that I have made towards the same end. For the answer to this question is the arcanum of the 13th card of the tarot, Death, which represents a skeleton who reaps only what pushes up from the black soil and rises above it, hands, heads, etc. Our empirical experience of death is the disappearance from the physical plane of living beings. Such is the fact of our experience from without, that we have by means of our five senses. But the disappearance as such is not confined to the domain of outward experience of the senses. It is experienced also in the domain of inner experience, in that of consciousness. There the images and representations disappear just as living beings do for the experience of the senses. This is what we call forgetting. And this forgetting extends each night to the totality of our memory, will and understanding, of a kind such that we forget ourselves entirely. This is what we call sleep. For our whole experience, outer and inner, forgetting, sleep and death are three manifestations of the same thing, namely the thing which affects disappearance. It is said that sleep is the younger brother of death. It is necessary to add, forgetting is the brother of sleep. Forgetting, sleep, and death are three manifestations, differing in degree, of a sole principle or force which affects the disappearance of intellectual, psychic, and physical phenomena. Forgetting is to sleep as sleep is to death. Or again, forgetting is to memory as sleep is to consciousness, and sleep is to consciousness as death is to life. One forgets, one goes to sleep, and one dies. One remembers, one awakes, and one is born. Remembering is to forgetting as awakening is to falling asleep, and awakening is to sleeping as birth is to death. One forgets oneself when one goes to sleep, and one remembers oneself when one awakes. It is also the mechanism of forgetting which is at work when one dies, and it is the mechanism of remembering which works at birth. When nature forgets us, then we die. When we forget ourselves, then we fall asleep. And when we lose active interest in something, then we forget it. Nevertheless, it must not be forgotten that the respective domains of forgetting, sleep, and death are more vast and more profound than intellectual forgetting, organic sleep, and clinical death. Apart from intellectual forgetting, there is also forgetting in the domain of the soul, or psychic forgetting, and a forgetting in the domain of the will, just as there is memory in the domain of the soul and memory in the domain of the will, beyond intellectual memory. Thus, for example, one can retain a clear and precise intellectual memory of a friend from the past, but at the same time have completely forgotten him psychically. One recalls, but without the living friendship of former times. Similarly, one can remember a person intellectually and psychically, i.e., with vivid feeling, but at the same time have forgotten him in the domain of the will. One remembers him with tenderness perhaps, but one does nothing for him. Beyond organic sleep, i.e., when one is in bed and oblivious of everything including oneself, there is psychic sleep and a sleep of the will. During the 16 or 18 hours that we are in the waking state, there are layers of our psychic being which are asleep. During the waking state, one is asleep to many things: facts, people, ideas, God. And if the Buddha is considered and venerated as fully awake to the facts of human life, such as sickness, old age, and death, it is because those who are not Buddhas know that they are asleep with regard to these facts, not intellectually, but psychically and in their will. They know it and they do not know it at the same time. For one knows truly when one understands what one knows, when one feels what one has understood, and when one has put into practice what one has understood and felt. Similarly, beyond clinical death, there is a psychic death and a moral death. During our 70 or 80 years of life, we bear within us layers of death in our psychic being. There are things which are missing from our psychic and moral being. The absence of faith, hope and love cannot be remedied either by arguments or by exhortations or even by a living example. An act of divine magic or grace is necessary to accomplish the infusion of life into that which is dead. And if Christ is worshipped as the risen one, it is because those who bear death within them know that it is only divine magic which can raise what is dead within them, and that the risen Christ is the guarantor of this. Forgetting, sleep and death, like remembering, waking and birth, have imaginary and symbolic expressions proper to them. Thus, black is the image of forgetting, tufts of grass are the image of sleep, and a skeleton with a scythe is the image of death. Black is the symbol both of involuntary and natural forgetting, and of that voluntary and supernatural forgetting of which St. John of the Cross speaks, this threefold night of the senses, the understanding and the will, in which the union of the soul with God is accomplished. Tufts of grass or leaves are the symbol of sleep, because deep sleep is the state where we live a vegetative life. Organic life, breathing, circulation, digestion and growth, continue during sleep without animality and humanity being present. We are plants when we are deep in sleep. And the skeleton is the symbol of death because it reduces the phenomenon of the conscious, mobile, living and material man to that which is mineral in him, the skeleton. Natural forgetting reduces man to animality, natural sleep reduces him to vegetality, and natural death reduces him to minerality. The whole problem of death, comprising 3 degrees, forgetting, sleep and death proper, or the arcanum of death, must therefore be presented to us as the image of a black sphere, beneath which there are tufts of grass and above which there is a skeleton. And it is precisely the 13th card of the tarot which presents us this image. The context of the card is that of the threefold manifestation of the principle of subtraction by way of forgetting, sleep and death. We have here the black soil, the blue and yellow tufts of grass, and also the skeleton mowing. The card contains still a 4th element, represented on the card by the human heads and hands and 1 foot, to which we shall return later. The 13th arcanum of the tarot is therefore that of the principle of subtraction or death, and is the opposite of the principle of addition or life. It is necessary to subtract the self from the astral body, the etheric body, and the physical body in order to understand the mechanism of forgetting, and it is necessary to subtract the self and the astral body from the etheric body and the physical body in order to obtain the state of sleep, and it is necessary to subtract the self, the astral body and the etheric body from the physical body in order to obtain the corpse, i.e. the fact of death. These 3 degrees of subtraction in their totality constitute the process of excarnation, just as the corresponding 3 degrees of addition constitute the totality of the process of incarnation. For incarnation is the addition of an astral body to the self, the addition of an etheric body to the astral body and the self, and lastly the addition of a physical body to the etheric body, the astral body, and the self. Now, the scythe, which is held by the skeleton of the card, represents the work of subtraction. It is this which symbolizes the force of excarnation, i.e. that which severs the ties between the self and the astral body, or forgetting, the ties between the astral body and the etheric body, or sleep, and the ties between the etheric body and the physical body, or death. What are the ties between the soul and the body? Rather, the soul and the bodies, that the scythe of the threefold principle of subtraction severs. What is it that unites the self to the astral body to the vital or etheric body, and the vital body to the physical body? In other words, how and why do we remember the past? How and why do we wake in the morning? And how and why do we live several decades? In the first place, let us disregard the enormous literature where these questions are dealt with, and endeavour to undertake a meditative work, i.e. to think directly about the subject which occupies us, without the intermediary of what may be borrowed from sources other than our immediate experience and understanding. To meditate is to think with a view to attaining certainty in the inner forum of consciousness, renouncing all pretension of arriving at things of general validity, i.e. things which may be a contribution to science. In meditation, and these letters are only meditations, it is a matter above all of the question, posed in all honesty to our own conscience, and answered in all honesty by our own conscience. What do I myself know? And not the question, what is generally known? Let us disregard for the moment, dear unknown friend, what is generally known and said on the subject of the ties between the soul and the body, and let us endeavour to take account, just for ourselves, of what we know and are able to know about it. Firstly, let us consider the domain of forgetting and remembering, the memory. Memory is the magic in the subjective domain, which affects the evocation of things from the past. It renders past things present. Just as a sorcerer or necromancer evokes the spirits of the dead by making them appear, so does memory evoke things of the past and make them appear to our inner mental vision. The present remembrance is the result of a magical operation in the subjective domain, where one has succeeded in evoking from the black void of forgetfulness a living image from the past. A living image from the past. Imprint, symbol, copy, phantom. It is all of these at once. It is an imprint insofar as it reproduces an impression received in the past. It is a symbol insofar as it makes use of my imagination to represent a reality which goes beyond its imaginary representation. It is a copy insofar as it only aims at reproducing the original from the past. It is a phantom insofar as it is an apparition from the black abyss of forgetfulness, and insofar as it recalls to life the past in making it present to my inner vision. What is the force at work in the subjective magical operation of remembering? There are 4 types of memory that one experiences: mechanical or automatic memory, logical memory, moral memory, and vertical or revelatory memory. Mechanical or automatic memory hardly makes any demand on the act of recall. The remembrance simply happens. It takes place in an automatic way according to the laws of association, i.e. resemblances, affinities, and alliances between things, which effect recall without my taking any other part than that of an observer. This sort of memory supplies me, on the occasion of each impression that I receive, with a host of images of the past from which I can choose. Thus, when I see a pipe, I can choose between images of the past which present themselves to my mind, e.g. an old sea dog whom I saw at B in 19, a book on Red Indians where it was a matter of the peace pipe ritual, my friend S, who used to put everyone to flight when he lit his pipe of tobacco, cultivated and prepared by himself at the time of the last war when there was no tobacco for sale, etc. Insofar as logical memory is concerned, I am more active than in the case of automatic memory. Here I have to think in order to remember things. Thus, for example, if I want to remember the Hindu Trinity, amongst whom I have forgotten one of the three terms, I ask myself, if there is a creator and a destroyer, Brahma and Shiva, which third principle ought to be found between the creator and the destroyer? I concentrate on the empty place between the two, and I make an effort to fill it logically. Ah, it is the conserver principle. This is Vishnu. Of course, I say to myself. In logical memory, there is less automatism and more conscious effort. With respect to moral memory, there is hardly any automatism. Here the remembrance is no longer something which happens, but rather it is an authentic magical act, although subjective. It is love which is at work in moral memory when it recalls things from the past. Here it is admiration, respect, friendship, gratitude, affection, and 1,000 other things which have deeply moved you, which render things from the past unforgettable, i.e. evocable at each instant. The more one has loved, the more one remembers through moral memory. As a general rule, young people possess a very strong mechanical memory. It becomes feebler with age, and it is logical or intellectual memory which comes to its assistance. This demands an effort to think, an intellectual effort. People who have failed to develop a taste for thinking and intellectual effort will have difficulties with their memory in mature age. Mechanical memory will fail them more and more, and logical memory, called supplemented, will also be lacking. With respect to moral memory, it is above all in old age that it replaces more and more not only mechanical memory, but also logical and intellectual memory. It is the heart, then, which supplies the energy which nourishes and maintains memory, and which supplements the growing lapse of mechanical memory and intellectual memory. Senile lapse of memory is due to the fact that the person who suffers from it failed to replace in time the functions of intellectual memory, without mentioning mechanical memory, by those of moral memory. People who know how to and are able to give everything a moral worth, and to see a moral sense in everything, will not forget anything. They will have a normal, if not excellent, memory to a very advanced age. Moral memory, which can comprehend everything without exception, is all the more effective the less one is morally indifferent. Indifference, a lack of moral interest, is the fundamental cause of the lapse of memory which often takes place in old age. The less one is indifferent, the more one remembers of the past, and the more one is capable of learning new things. Beyond the three types of memory, mechanical, logical, and moral, of which it is a matter here, there is still the kind of memory that we have designated as vertical or revelatory memory. It is not a memory of the past in the sense of the horizontal line, today, yesterday, the day before, etc., but rather in the sense of the vertical line, here, higher, still higher, etc. It is a memory which does not link the present to the past on the plane of physical, psychic, and intellectual life, but which links the plane of ordinary consciousness to planes or states of consciousness higher than that of ordinary consciousness. It is the faculty of the lower self to reproduce the experience and knowledge of the higher self, or, if you like, the faculty of the higher self to imprint its experience and knowledge upon the consciousness of the lower self. It is the link between the higher I and the lower I which renders us authentically religious and wise, and immune to the assaults of skepticism, materialism, and determinism. It is this also which is the source of certainty not only of God and the spiritual world, with its hierarchical entities, but also of the immortality of our being and reincarnation, wherever it is a matter of reincarnation. Dawn is the friend of the Muses, and similar popular proverbs, such as Die Morgenstunde hat Gold im Munde, the morning hour has gold in its mouth, or Utro vecare mudrea, morning is wiser than the evening, or even Die Morgenstund heeft goed in den mond, the Dutch version of Die Morgenstunde hat Gold im Munde, relate to the benefits of vertical memory from which one benefits in the morning, after the return of consciousness from the plane of natural ecstasy or sleep. Vertical memory is the more effective to the extent that the three sacred vows, obedience, poverty, and chastity, render the lower man capable of listening to, perceiving, and receiving things from above without distortion. Vertical memory is fundamentally only moral memory carried in its development to a still higher degree. This is why it is only moral purification, which the practice of the 3 sacred vows entails, that counts in the case of vertical memory. Intellectual interests, as such, do not count here. This is an outlined inventory of the domain of memory. Let us now return to the question, what is the force at work in the subjective magical operation of recall? It is necessary, firstly, to take account of the fact that in the scale that we have established, mechanical memory, intellectual memory, moral memory, vertical memory, it is a matter of degrees of remoteness and proximity, concerning an immediate and lucid understanding of the evidence as to how and why memory functions through consciousness. In fact, the more something is mechanical, the more it is removed from immediate understanding through consciousness, and the more it is removed from the latter, the more it is mysterious and incomprehensible. A purely mechanical explanation is, truth to tell, not at all an explanation, because it removes the object to be explained from the domain where understanding takes place, by shifting it from the domain of comprehensibility, i.e. from thinkability and feelability, into the domain of the unconscious and therefore of incomprehensibility. He who wants to explain the phenomenon of smiling, for example, by the contraction of muscles in the region of the mouth and cheeks, and this latter through electrical impulses transmitted through the nerves from the center called the brain, will in no way give an explanation of the phenomenon of smiling, even if he correctly describes the entire mechanical process in the muscles and nerves, for the simple reason that he disregards the joy of which the smiling is a manifestation, and which set in motion both the muscles of the mouth and the electrical impulses of the nerves. For it is not nerves and muscles which are manifested in smiling, but rather joy. And just as the description of the mechanical process of the muscles and nerves is in no way a reply to the question, what is smiling? So is every mechanical explanation, of whatever it may be, in no way an explanation of the whole, but rather it reduces questions to silence by shifting the subject of the questions from the domain of comprehensibility to that of incomprehensibility, from the light of consciousness to the darkness of the unconscious. For what we call mechanical is in reality only the unconscious, or rather, that which is deprived of consciousness, and is therefore inaccessible to consciousness, and therefore incomprehensible, unthinkable, and unfeelable. Mechanicalism is therefore not at all the realm of answers, but rather the graveyard for real questions. This is why in the scale of memory under discussion we must not, and in fact cannot, seek to understand the working of recall in the domain where it is unknowable and incomprehensible, i.e. in that of mechanical memory. On the contrary, we must seek it at the other end of the scale, where it is least embedded in the darkness of mechanicalism, and where it most reveals its essence in the light of consciousness, i.e. in the domain of moral memory and vertical memory. For it is the stage of complete development which illuminates and explains the previous stages, and not vice versa. The minimum is only the reduced maximum, and it is through the maximum that one understands the minimum, and not vice versa. It is consciousness which renders the mechanical and unconscious comprehensible, the latter being only consciousness reduced to a minimum, and not vice versa. It is man who is the key to the biological evolution of nature, and not the primitive organic cell. We must therefore seek for the key to the operation of recall in memory at the highest degree of memory's development, moral memory and vertical memory. Therefore, what is the force at work in the subjective magical operation of remembering, such as it is revealed in vertical memory and in moral memory? The following reveals it to its highest conceivable degree, other degrees being only its analogous, weakened manifestations. Quote, "Now Jesus loved Martha and her sister and Lazarus. When Jesus came, he found that Lazarus had already been in the tomb 4 days. Jesus wept. Then Jesus, deeply moved again, came to the tomb. It was a cave, and a stone lay upon it. Jesus said, 'Take away the stone.' So they took away the stone. Jesus cried with a loud voice, 'Lazarus, come out.' The dead man came out, his hands and feet bound with bandages, and his face wrapped with a cloth. John 11:5-44. Here is the force of recall in its most complete, most strong, and most elevated manifestation. It is love, for Jesus loved Martha and her sister and Lazarus. The operation of recall to life, or resurrection, comprises 3 stages: that of coming, that of taking away the stone, and that of recall, i.e., crying with a loud voice. Firstly, coming. To come and to arrive is the activity which seeks and finds the last door which separates the recaller from the recalled. The about 2 miles between Bethany and Jerusalem that the Master went in order to arrive at the tomb of Lazarus represent the first effort in the whole operation of recall, that which aims at arriving at the point of maximum approach to the subject of recall. Then the taking away of the stone. This is the effort which vanquishes doubt, depression, fatigue, and lastly despair, which bar the way to the recalled, like the stone placed before the tomb. By analogy, one is powerless to recall in the domain of vertical memory and moral memory things that one believes are lost forever, or regarding which one believes that it is impossible to call them to the light of consciousness. This doubt and lack of faith paralyzes the effort to recall, and is like the stone placed before the tomb. This stone is often, if not always, the cause for many people of the absence of all living feeling and conviction, without speaking of precise and concrete remembrances of former lives, i.e., of reincarnation. The remembrances have knocked at the door in vain, the stone placed before it not allowing them to come out from their depths and enter into the light of consciousness. Lastly, recall. To cry with a loud voice is the culminating and the supreme effort of the operation of recall through the force of love, whether to life, as was the case with Lazarus, or whether to memory, as is the case of recall with vertical and moral memory. A voice is louder, i.e. more audible, in the physical world, the more intense the vibrations are that it produces in the air. It is otherwise in the spiritual world. There a voice is more audible, i.e. louder, the more it expresses underlying effort and suffering. Work and suffering are the things which render our voices audible to the spiritual world and in the spiritual world. These are the factors which create vibrations sufficiently loud in the spiritual world in order to render our voices audible. This is why the Rosary Prayer repeats the Ave Maria 150 times and the Pater Noster 15 times. For if it is suffering which renders audible the ejaculative prayer of a single word, Jesus, for example, it is effort which renders the Rosary Prayer audible. I would lack respect for the truth if I did not say that the effort of the Rosary Prayer founded on suffering makes it a powerful means, sometimes almost all-powerful, in sacred magic. Now, the cry with a loud voice, which is the decisive act in the whole operation of recall, must be strong both in effort and in suffering. Jesus wept. Then Jesus, deeply moved again, came to the tomb. Jesus cried with a loud voice, "Lazarus, come out." It is love which wept and which strove to accomplish the miracle of recall from death to life, which is also the case in recall from forgetfulness to memory. Is recall therefore a miracle? Yes, a miracle. But allow me, dear unknown friend, to say something concerning the miracle that I believe to be of the highest significance, of which every Christian Hermeticist and every Kabbalist should take account. It is that there is no freedom outside of the miraculous, and that man is only man in so far as he lives from the miracle, through the miracle, and for the miracle. All that is not mechanical, physical, psychic, and intellectual, is miraculous, and all that is not miraculous is only mechanical, physical, psychic, and intellectual. Freedom is a miracle, and man is only free in so far as he is not a machine, physical, psychic, and intellectual. We have no other choice than between the machine and slavery on the one hand, and the miracle and freedom on the other hand. The human machine functions according to the determined program, maximum pleasure at minimum cost, in a way so as to lend itself to precise prediction in its reactions to given circumstances. In the intellectual domain, It rejects every notion and every idea which does not harmonize with the intellectual system established in it. In the psychic domain, it rejects all that does not harmonize with the complex of happiness established in it. And in the physical domain, it automatically follows the orders transmitted by the complex instinct established in it. It is only the functioning of the human machine when a rich man declares himself anti-communist and a poor man declares himself pro-communist. But it is a miracle, that is to say an act of freedom, when a rich man abandons his possessions and embraces poverty, as did St. Anthony the Great and also many other saints, and also Carmelites, Franciscans, Dominicans, etc., who took the vow of poverty. The miracle of St. Francis is not only the healing of a leper, but also the love of St. Francis for Lady Poverty. Did not the miracles of Jesus Christ after the resurrection of Lazarus culminate in the cross on Calvary, where in the full agony of torture he said, "Father, forgive them, for they know not what they do." Luke 23:34. All that one does is miraculous. All intellectual, psychic and physical functioning according to nature, i.e. according to human automatism, is mechanical. The Sermon on the Mount is the teaching of doing and of the triumph over functioning. Love your enemies, do good to those who hate you, bless those who curse you, and pray for those who persecute you, so that you may be sons of your Father who is in heaven. Luke 6:27-28, Matthew 5:44-45. Is this not a teaching which aims at the liberation of the machine, i.e. of all functioning, and which is a school for the miraculous? Because to bless those who curse you is a miracle from the point of view of the normal and natural functioning of the reactions of the human machine. This does not just happen, it is done, or it is created. And I repeat, one only does miracles, and all that is done is a miracle, and nothing is done without it being a miracle. All that which is not a miracle is not really done, it happens as part of automatic functioning. It is only through the miracle that true being expresses itself, that the creative word is revealed. It is wrong, therefore, to interpret the phrases at the beginning of the Gospel according to John as the teaching of a kind of cosmic rationalism, analogous to the Stoic doctrine of nous, or mind. No, the phrases at the beginning of the Gospel according to John openly declare the cosmic role of the miracle, and that the world is due to a miracle, i.e. that it was made by the creative word, and not that it was due to any functioning, to any automatic, even highly intellectual process. All things were made through the word, and nothing that was made without him. John 1:3. This is what the evangelist says, and what we have said above concerning the miracle and the machine, i.e. concerning doing and functioning, is only the microcosmic analogy to the statement of macrocosmic significance from the Gospel according to John. Now, all things made through the word includes also recall in vertical and moral memory. The act of recall belongs to the sphere of doing, and therefore to that of the miraculous, and not to the sphere of functioning. Recall in logical memory is a mixture of doing and functioning. Lastly, recall in mechanical memory is only functioning, i.e. the act of moral recall reduced to a minimum. If recall is an act analogous to the resurrection of Lazarus, then what is forgetting?